Alors, sans plus tarder, on débute tout de suite avec notre première invitée de marque, la vice-présidente des opérations digitales et de l'information technologique de Edison Research depuis 2003. C'est une pionnière de l'usage des nombreuses techniques en ligne et mobiles pour créer des instruments de recherche qui produisent des données de qualité pour des clients aux quatre coins du monde. Elle est venue nous présenter l'étude des habitudes d'écoute, une étude qui retrace sous forme d'un journal les habitudes d'écoute des Canadiens, ces gens qui ne sortent pas toujours leur carte de débit le moment venu d'écouter du caillouche. Alors voilà. Mesdames et messieurs, Madame Laura Silvia.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here. Thank you to Jérôme and APEM for inviting me. Laura Silvia, Vice President at Edison Research. Edison Research is a full-service market research company based in the U.S. in beautiful Somerville, New Jersey, albeit it is snowy there as it is here today. Edison conducts all types of music and consumer research throughout North America and across the globe, including a study we release each year in the U.S. called the Infinite Dial. The Infinite Dial is an annual series we've been fielding since 1998 to measure consumer adoption of digital media. The Infinite Dial measures the U.S. landscape, but has sort of become digital media's report card and taken on a life of its own, even outside the U.S. And we're actually thrilled to announce that we fielded the first Infinite Dial Study Canada earlier this year, and we're releasing the results in a free webinar on April 4th. So I have some great data to show today about how Canadians are listening to music, but first I want to talk about how the technology and these little devices in our pockets, smartphones, has changed audio listening behavior. While traditional media, AM/FM radio, is still the platform most time is spent with, as we'll see, it's certainly an exciting time for digital audio. And why is digital audio growing? Well, as we know, the prevalence of the smartphone. We've been tracking smartphone ownership in the Infinite Dial study since 2009, and the 2018 data shows that more than 4 in 5 Americans ages 12 plus owns a smartphone. And these numbers are only a bit lower here in Canada. These devices are changing the ways people are consuming audio, and the technologies that are following are enabling more audio in more places, consumable in more ways than ever. I'll show more data that supports this, but first let's take a look at a quick video that shows just how essential smartphones have become in our daily lives. These are man-on-the-street interviews we conducted in Nashville, Tennessee last year.
I have an iPhone 6S.
iPhone 7 Plus.
Could you live without your smartphone?
Probably not. No, I do everything on it.
What is it, Nan? What's our smartphone? Apple.
Where does your phone not go with you? Anywhere?
No, not him. It's always attached to him.
Yeah, because I have to use it for work. It's the most important thing in the bathroom for me, yes. It's actually more important than toilet paper.
Let's go in the bathroom with you guys.
Oh yeah, all the time. Best place to Snapchat is the bathroom.
Yeah, I use it. I does go to the bathroom with me.
From time to time. Yeah, it's not a lot. We do. We all do.
It's with me there too.
How about the bathroom?
Yes, that's my favorite time to play actually, especially at work. To the bathroom.
Favorite thing to do in the bathroom on your phone?
I'm playing games or whatever.
What's your favorite app?
Instagram.
The weather. Social media, does that count? Instagram.
Facebook.
I mean, Facebook, of course, number one.
I think it's a toss-up right now between Snapchat and Instagram.
Snapchat.
Snapchat. Definitely Snapchat. Yeah, big Snapchat.
I'm getting into the NPR app recently because the news is very interesting.
Probably Twitter, just because that's where the news is at now.
Probably the GPS.
You know, Gmail. It's the one I use most often.
Mine's music apps.
What kind of music app?
Country music apps, but Apple Music, Spotify, all of them, really.
Do you spend more time looking at your phone or your girlfriend? His phone.
My phone.
Do you spend more time looking at your friend or your phone?
Different phone. Yeah, friend.
Friend.
How about you?
When I have an awesome friend that I want to spend time with, friend. When I have somebody that...
So say you were at an event and you dropped your phone in the porta potty, what would you do?
probably pick it out and wipe it off. I wouldn't tell nobody about it.
Yeah, I'd probably get it.
Yeah, I'd definitely try to get that.
What's in the porta potty?
Use your imagination.
I mean, you gotta be bold. I mean, it costs money, so.
Hands down in the toilet.
Flush or pick it up?
Pick it up. Hands down.
Stretch?
No,
Flush.
I'm not
No,
flush.
definitely flush. I would have flushed. I would have flushed. No, I would let that die. I would go get another one. Nothing. Leave. I would not fish.
It's gone. I'm just
in there. It's not worth that.
No, it would just be there for all of time. Yeah, most definitely.
I'm good.
I'll let him go get it. Hey, phone's for you.
What if it was a porta potty? Oh, that's probably your Uber.
We tackle some serious topics over at Edison. Now, we all know smartphones are everywhere in today's society, and clearly from the video, they're everywhere. And in this report, we'll see how music listening behavior is changing as a result. So first, a little bit of background. Edison has been researching the audio space throughout its history, and a few years ago, we realized something was missing in the measurement of music and audio. There were resources to measure the different platforms, such as radio, streaming audio, and satellite radio individually, but nothing that captured the share of all audio together. And so we developed the share of ear study, where we give respondents an audio listening diary and ask them to keep track of all audio they listen to during a 24-hour period. Here's a short video we produced that explains our share of ear study in the US.
Try to swim, won't drown this time. Jumping, sinking in, over my head so high. Got my head in the clouds, I'm going on to make my way. Oh yeah. What do you do when love loses you? Give it up. I'll keep on trying. Take me with you. Take me with you. I've been hanging on for so damn long, so when you go, oh, take me too. Stand back, so yeah.
So we began conducting the share of ear study in the US in 2014, and we're thrilled that last year we found a lead client to launch the study in Canada in Radio Connects. So today I will be showing you data from our first ever Share of Ear Canada study. Share of Ear Canada was fielded in April of 2017, comprising a national sample of over 1,000 Canadians ages 13 plus. It's collected both online and offline to reach those who do not have unlimited data plans or even internet access at all, and thus account for any internet usage bias. And of course, in order to be a truly representative study of Canadians, it was offered in both English and French. In the 24-hour listening diary respondents are given, they're instructed to record when they listen to audio, where they listen, what they're listening to, and what device they listen on. And while Share of Ear measures all audio, including music, but also talk, sports, and other speech content, what I'm going to show you today is what we found in this data about music listening, when, where, and how Canadians are listening to music. From the Share of Ear study, we found that Canadians listen to an average of 4 hours and 14 minutes of audio per day. Now, some respondents reported no listening, and some reported as many as 14 or 15 hours, but it averages out to 4.25 hours per day. And when we look at music listening, Canadians on average listen to about 3 hours and 13 minutes per day. So of those 4 hours, 14 minutes of audio listening, well over 3 hours is to music. Out of our sample of over 1,000 Canadians in Share of Ear, 85% of people reported listening to music on their diary day. Keep in mind, this is a daily number. If it were weekly or monthly, of course, it would be higher. Looking at time again, this graph represents the 4¼ hours of audio listening respondents reported on average. So 76% of that time is spent listening to music, which is the 3 hours, 13 minutes. And the rest of time spent listening to audio goes 14% of time to news, 7% to talk or personalities, 2% of time is spent listening to sports, and 1% of time is spent listening to audiobooks. So now that we've seen what percentage of the population has daily music listening and how much time Canadians are spending listening to music in a typical day, we'll look at when, where, and how they're doing it. And we'll see what the data reveals about how and where Canadians are using smartphones and technology in their music listening. So first we'll start here with when people are listening to music in an average day. This graph shows, or it will soon show, the average number of minutes per hour that people reported listening to music. It starts with the 6 to 7 a.m. hour on the left there, and across the bottom is every hour of the day, all the way up to 6 a.m. the following morning. As people are waking up, music listening is about 6.5 minutes and rises throughout the morning. Music listening is the highest between the hours of 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. at about 13 minutes per hour on average. It starts to decline slowly in the afternoon and then more rapidly in the evening as we get into primetime TV hours. Of course, listening goes to nearly zero overnight, and then you can see it starts to curve back up again in the morning. Now, where is this listening happening? In a typical day, more people listen to music at home than anywhere else, 63% of Canadians, with in-car listening second, with 45% of people reporting listening to music in cars. 15% of people listen to music at work, and keep in mind this percentage is among all Canadians. It would be much larger among those who are employed, but this 15% is among all Canadians. 5% listen on public transit, and 13% listen in other locations, such as at the gym, while walking, etc. Now, while this graph shows the percentage of people who listen to music in each location in a typical day, this graph represents the total amount of time spent listening to music. So that 3 hours, 13 minutes, nearly 60% of that time is spent listening at home, which makes sense considering the sheer amount of time we are at home versus in any other location. 19% of time is spent listening to music in car, 15% of time at work, 2% on public transit, and 5% in other locations. So now when listening to music, what are Canadians listening to? This graph again represents that 3 hours, 13 minutes of daily music listening on average. So a bit under half, 47% of that time spent listening to music is to AM/FM radio, which includes the internet streams of AM/FM radio. 18% of time is spent listening to owned music, such as CDs or MP3s. 10% of time is spent listening to streaming music, which is the pure plays, such as Spotify and Apple Music. YouTube gets 12% of time, and the actual wording in the diary was listening to music videos on YouTube. So this 12% does not include any time that may have been spent watching cat videos. 8% of time to TV music channels, which are not music video channels, but rather audio-only music channels such as Stingray. 4% of time spent listening to Sirius XM satellite radio, and 1% of time was attributed to other, where people wrote in things like piped in music at a workplace or listening to a jukebox. So the fact that the biggest share of time listening to music is spent listening to AM/FM radio may seem high to anybody who lives in the world of Wi-Fi and unlimited data and always being connected with one device or another, but keep in mind this study reflects the entire population of Canada, ages 13 and up. So it includes older Canadians and people who don't have high-speed internet or any internet connectivity at all, and those who rely on their cars to get around, where AM/FM radio is still the easiest option for music. Now, this graph shows the share of time spent listening to music on the various platforms measured among all Canadians, and there are some slight differences when looking at only those living in Quebec, which we'll see shortly. First, as you may know, those living in Quebec comprise 23% of the population, so that's the subset we're looking at when we look at those living in Quebec. And looking at the share of time spent listening to music on the different platforms among those living in Quebec, we see a bit less time is spent listening to music on AM/FM radio. It's 39% here, and it's 47% among all Canadians. And the difference is spread out among own music, streaming music, YouTube, and TV music channels. All of those are a few points higher than the total among those living in Quebec. So those living in Quebec spend slightly more time than the total population listening to music on platforms that require more technology than traditional media. And we'll see in the data coming up how, for all Canadians, when the speed bumps are removed from using technology to access music, the usage follows. But first, let's take a look at another quick video to illustrate how technology is becoming an integral part in daily music listening in many of the locations we find ourselves in during a typical day. Edison conducted a study of smartphone owners in the US for country radio, and we'll return to Nashville, Tennessee in this video to see an interview with a woman named Jennifer, where she talks about her use of technology to facilitate music listening in her daily life. For this project, as we recorded the respondents, we simultaneously recorded their smartphone screens, and you'll actually see footage of her smartphone display in sort of a split screen in the video.
My name's Jennifer, and I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. I've gotten more into country than I ever have. I use Amazon Music, Pandora, Spotify sometimes, and then in the car, I listen to the radio. The most one that I use is Amazon Music, just because, like, I have Amazon Prime and I use that for watching TV and everything. So it's just, I don't know, it's just easy for me. So, and then they have radio stations and they have playlists that you can listen to that are separate. I just like the way it's laid out. Usually if I'm in the bathroom or something getting ready in the morning, I'll use my phone. He likes to listen to a lot of different music, and if we're doing it together, I'll usually use the iPad because it's easier for him to handle. And then if I'm cleaning or something, I just use the TV because I can, you know, turn it up really loud. Let's listen to your favorite song. You like that song?
I say I'm too late. Got nothing in my brain. That's what people say.
To me, FM radio is basically when I'm in my car. I think I stream more than listening to the radio because obviously I'm at home, I'm at work, I can stream on my computer, I can stream on my phone. I don't stream like a Nashville radio station on my phone. I don't even know if you can. I've never tried. I'm sure you can, but I've never tried that because it doesn't seem as accessible to me.
So Jennifer sort of took us through her day and the locations she's in during the day, home, work, car, and her music listening in each location. She mentions using her smartphone and tablet, often at home, and we even saw her listen to YouTube on her TV at the end there. She talks about streaming from her computer and smartphone at work and listening to AM/FM radio in the car. And looking at the share of music data among Canadians, we see some of the behaviors Jennifer illustrated in the US mirrored here in Canada. Jennifer mentioned the ease of use of audio apps, and what we see in the data supports this. When the friction is limited or removed altogether from using technology to access music, the usage follows. And on the contrary, when and where there is friction, the usage tips toward traditional media. This bar represents the time spent listening to music in a typical day. It's the same data from the circular graph among all Canadians that we saw right before the video, just straightened out into a bar for easier comparison. So let's look at this now by location. At home, while AM/FM radio is still the platform most time is spent with, Canadians are spending a little less time listening to music on AM/FM radio than the total, and more time streaming music and listening to music on YouTube. In fact, while 41% of time is spent listening to music on AM/FM radio, which includes streaming AM/FM radio, 31% of time is spent listening to streaming music and music on YouTube combined. At work, As we know, not everyone works in an office all day with internet access, and even for some who do, there may be restrictions on internet usage, and so there may be more friction to the use of technology to listen to music in the workplace. And we see almost 2/3 of time spent listening to music is to AM/FM radio, much more than the total, and slightly less time than the total to owned music, streaming, or YouTube. In car, traditional media still rules. More than 2/3 of time spent listening to music is to AM/FM radio, very little time to streaming, and that entire other category, that 13%, is Sirius XM. Technology is integrating more into new cars to make it easier to listen to streaming music, but more than half the cars on the road today in Canada are model year 2011 or older. So in many cases, traditional media is the easiest, and in some cases, the only option for music. And in other locations, we see the highest contrast to the total population, where the most time spent listening to music is to owned music, and then streaming, and then AM/FM radio. And this makes sense given that the other locations are on public transit, at the gym, or while walking around, and if your music is accessible via the smartphone in your pocket, that's where the listening time goes. In fact, when we look at the devices used in these locations, the how of the when, where, and how Canadians are listening to music, this is reinforced further. So again, this bar represents the amount of time spent listening to music in a typical day, but now we're looking at what devices are used. In total, 43% of time listening to music is done using an AM/FM radio. 18% of time is spent listening through a computer, 20% on a mobile device, and 19% on other devices, such as through a satellite radio, a CD player, a TV, or an internet-connected TV device, such as a DVR, gaming console, Apple TV, etc. And when we look at this by the locations we measure, at home, at work, in car, and other locations, we can see where Canadians are using their technology for music. At home, 42% of time spent listening to music is on a computer or mobile device. Less so at work, where 55% of time spent listening is on an AM/FM radio and 34% on a computer or mobile device. Again, that can be because access is limited at work. In car, again, we see the majority of time spent listening to music is on an AM/FM radio, 12% on a mobile device. And in other locations, smartphones get the most music listening time by far. And we see some really interesting differences when we look at device usage by age groups. This graph shows the current population of Canada, which is almost equal thirds, ages 13 to 34, 35, 54, and 55 plus, slightly more 55 plus. As we look at some data coming up that shows these age breakouts, keep in mind these groups are nearly evenly spread. So looking at devices again, but now among those age groups, 13 to 34, 35, 54, and 55 plus, we see that listening via an AM/FM radio receiver rises with the older age groups, and mobile and computer usage time declines. But among 13 to 34s, the largest amount of time spent listening to music is on their mobile devices. In fact, millennials are the only group who spend more time listening to music on computers and mobile devices than on an AM/FM radio. And we can look at music listening by device among those living in Quebec as well. Those in Quebec spend less time listening to music on an AM/FM radio receiver than the total, which makes sense since, as we saw earlier, they're listening less to music from AM/FM radio than the total, and they spend more time listening on a computer, mobile device, and other devices. Now, we've seen technology and mobile devices are being used to listen to music when and where the technology is available, so let's take a look at what Canadians are listening to on their smartphones. This graph represents the amount of time in a typical day Canadians are listening to music on their smartphones. As you can see, this graph is very different from music listening overall. AM/FM radio has a much smaller share of time at 5%. Owned music takes up nearly half of time spent listening on smartphones, and streaming music takes up 28% of time, which together is more than 3/4 of time spent listening on smartphones to music. YouTube has a presence here as well, with 16% of time spent listening to music on mobile attributed to music videos on YouTube in a typical day. Now, just when we thought we had a handle on how people are using technology to listen to audio and music, this past year we've seen behavior start to shift in the US with the rise of the smart speaker. Amazon Alexa, Google Home, now Apple's HomePod, and other devices have simultaneously created new audio behaviors and also brought about a resurgence of the old-fashioned behavior of gathering around the radio. Edison has conducted several studies in the US over the past year or so focusing on smart speakers, and while they're much more recent to the market here in Canada and some still not available yet, perhaps looking at patterns in the US as a result of these devices can serve as a glimpse into the future of music listening here in Canada. Here's a video from a study we conducted with NPR on how Americans are using smart speakers in general, and also how these devices integrate music and audio more easily into more aspects of their everyday lives.
Settling into being a new mom has been quite the roller coaster. Having Alexa and the ability to do a lot more things hands-free is really helpful.
Alexa, give me my flash briefing.
Come on, baby, take it easy on me. My favorite thing to do right now is have her calm my child. I'll yell out, Alexa, play Can't Take My Eyes Off of You by Frankie Valli, and she does, and it's wonderful.
So we have Alexa Tap. My daughter got it as a gift for herself. She saved up enough money and she really wanted it.
How do you spell February?
February is spelled.
She'll say, you know, I learned this new dance at school, this song, let's find it on Alexa. She'll pull it up and she'll do a little performance for us, show us what she learned.
Play Juju on that beat.
Playing Juju on that beat. It's easy.
Then why do you want to play it?
What it really replaced was the need for my daughter to really come to me to get the music on and play it, or to use our phone. So for her, it's more like in her hand now. We probably hear that song at least 4 or 5 times a day. Yeah.
17 years ago, when I got divorced, I decided I was gonna raise my daughter just by myself, just pay my bills and try to be the best mother I could.
Before you were born, I knew you.
My baby left my house in 2011. And then after she graduated, then she stayed in Washington. And then from Washington, she's in New York. Of course, she's not coming here. But then Alexa is here with me. Alexa, play Celine Dion. You could talk to Alexa, and then it makes me feel like I'm not alone anymore. Oh, I love the song. Well, I used to have a radio, but after I bought the Alexa, now the radio is parked in my garage just to send it to Dominican Republic, to the poor people. Never will be like my daughter, because my daughter is my life, but Alexa will be after my daughter, a granddaughter.
Into the importance of these devices among those who own them, and the music listening behaviors that are happening around these devices. Now, nearly all of the audio on smart speakers is streaming audio, so let's take a look at the share of music among the streaming brands that were available in Canada when we fielded this study last April. So this graph represents the amount of time spent in a typical day listening to streaming music. 60% of that time is to Spotify, 13% to Apple Music, 8% to Google Play, and 19% to others. The Share of Your Canada study was conducted not long after iHeartRadio was launched here, and in that other category, about 1% of time listening to streaming music is spent listening to iHeart. But this is how fast the digital landscape is changing. We fielded this last April, and now you have iHeart and Amazon Music, just launched in the fall as well. And among 13 to 34s, we see Spotify jump to nearly 70% of time spent listening to streaming music, while the other brands remain about the same. So that increase in time among millennials was taken from the small percentages of other brands. So to recap the key findings that we saw today, overall, the largest share of time spent listening to music in an average day is spent listening to AM/FM radio. However, when and where people can use technology to facilitate music listening, they do. The majority of time spent listening to music per day is at home, and most at-home listening is done on a computer or mobile device. And millennials spend more time listening to music on their mobile devices than any other way. And finally, it's an exciting time for digital audio. If the US data is any indication, when smart speakers become more prevalent here in Canada, we may start to see a shift in audio and music listening behaviors, and we'll be interested to track what happens. Thank you for listening. I think I can take questions. A few minutes for questions, if anyone has. I'll be available through at least lunchtime to come one-on-one.
Thanks very much for your presentation, very interesting. I have a question though. Do you have any numbers before those numbers to see the evolution or not? Because of course it was the first year, but
Yes.
I wonder if you had any other kind of similar info, even if not as precise, that would help us see the evolution of the trajectory of these numbers.
We just did it. We just had this first one in Canada. We do have previous numbers in the US, but this was the first one in Canada. So we'll be interested if we do feel this again, then we'll start to see the tracking and we'll see how the trends are shifting. Thank you.
S'il n'y a pas d'autres questions, moi je vais en poser une. I might ask a question.
With this fairly small sample, how did you control the sample to be sure it's representative?
Yes, well, it was over 1,000, and so we field it both online and offline to represent those who don't have internet access and data plans. So we have a metric that we use to balance the sample to make sure that what we get in our 1,000 has the same percentages of age and geography and internet usage that the total population has. So the sample represents the total population. So we can say, yes, this is representative of Canadians ages 13 plus.
And did you do the recruitment by panel, or what was the way to approach your respondents?
Yes, it's a random sample.
Random sample? Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
So thank you for the presentation. Do you know any difference between passive listening and active listening? Like people would just turn on the radio and just listen to what there is on the radio versus the ones who actually go and search for music, and where do they search? Is it mostly online or streaming or YouTube, etc.?
We don't measure searching in this study. That would be a different study. This is measured, it's self-reported, so we give these respondents a diary and we say, okay, every hour of the day, what did you listen to, how long, where was it, what devices, and that's how we capture the data that we use here. We don't ask that, so it's how they report it.
Have you seen have you been able to compare urban cities versus rural regions? Like, because technology, if you go outside of cities, it's not as good. So, have you seen an impact or a difference between those two?
Right, we can look at that. I don't have that with me, but we can look at it. Like I showed the couple of graphs by Quebec, so we do have geography in the data, and we can look at the difference, urban versus rural. Yeah.
Then I'll ask my question then. I was a bit surprised to see that the radio listening in Quebec seems to be lower than the rest of Canada. And if I recall correctly, it's also lower in the US than in the rest in total of Canada. And I was wondering if you have any clues on why there's less radio listening in Quebec. Is it due to daily routines, the location, or do you have any hypothesis on why it would be different here?
Well, in the US, we have Pandora, so we do have more streaming, so that takes up more time, takes time away from AM/FM. In Quebec, I don't know, given the history of AM/FM and the different regulations, that might have played a part in why AM/FM is a little bit lower in Quebec.
Y a-t-il d'autres questions? Non, ben merci infiniment, Madame Laura, Silvia, une bonne main d'applaudissements. Thank you very much.